So hello everyone. Today is our, I think it's sixth AI in healthcare talks. So each one we get different experience from different guests. So the talks are hosted by Chirag and Ryan. We are colleagues from Stanford. We used to be a postdoc as well. Now we have different roles in industry and academics, and I will let them introduce themselves after I introduce some about Magnimind. So Magnimind Academy, which I'm the co-founder, and we are data science academy, as well as we run several data science and AI healthcare projects. And we have hosted over 100 events last year, free workshops, free webinars, and we have even free mini boot camps, which it will be enough for a lot of engineers to understand the data science and start to do projects. And for this event, I should just say that we are broadcasting in several channels in YouTube, Facebook, and I think it's 6 channels. So anyone in the other channels, just let you know that we are broadcasting from Zoom. You can register Zoom through the Magnimind meetup groups. We have around 10,000 members in 6 different meetup groups. And I also highly recommend subscribe to YouTube channel. We are hosting all our events in YouTube channel, and you can see the recordings there. And especially AI healthcare talks is getting very popular. And so we started AI healthcare talks. We just want to bring the different domain of expertise together, and we can see what we can do together. And from feedback over last 6 talks, I can tell you that I see good interaction between people, especially between speakers and hosts, and sometimes also audience. They reach out some participants, and there's a good synergy in these talks are coming out. Second, we learn a lot of new ideas, a lot of new startup ideas for startup people. And also a lot of collaboration ideas are coming out of it. And I hear also some good feedback from some data scientists. They like to work on AI in healthcare, so they are actually shifting it. I believe there are a huge space there. There are a lot to be done, and there we need a lot of good, talented, qualified data scientists to work there. Now I will let Ryan and then Chirag just introduce themselves, which Chirag will introduce the speakers as well.
Great. So I'm Ryan Spitler. I direct the Precision Health and Integrated Diagnostics Center at Stanford, as well as the Canary Center for Cancer Early Detection. So we look at keeping people as healthy as long as possible using a variety of continuous health monitoring tools.
And hi, everyone. My name is Chirag Patel. I'm a clinical assistant professor in the departments of neurology in the division of neuro-oncology and radiology in the division of molecular imaging at Stanford. As Murat mentioned, I was a postdoc at Stanford with Murat and Ryan, and now I see patients in the cancer center, primarily patients with brain tumors, specifically glioblastoma, and my research efforts focus on glioblastoma therapies, as well as investigating the use of machine learning to analyze the brain MRI scans of patients with glioblastoma to better predict responses to therapy and even potentially recurrence of disease. So that I'm really happy to be able to introduce our 2 guest speakers today. First up, we have Alan Gale, who's a serial high-tech entrepreneur and the former VP of Skyroam and the co-founder of Deep Blue Communications, which is a leader and a pioneer in Wi-Fi technology. He graduated from UC Berkeley and earned a master's degree from MIT. And as an entrepreneur, he has launched Aimee Health with the goals of advancing human longevity, optimizing brain health, and combating chronic illness through artificial intelligence. And in addition, we have Alex Baqui, who graduated from medical school and has decided to delay residency to focus on developing the tech solutions that healthcare needs. He completed his medical training at the University of Texas at Houston McGovern Medical School located in the Texas Medical Center, which is the largest medical metropolis in the nation. And just as an aside, I also graduated from the same medical school, so it's good to meet a fellow alumnus from there. And he's also the co-founder and CEO of Valhalla Healthcare, a team of providers and data scientists leveraging advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning technology to deliver the affordable, accessible, and effective healthcare that everyone deserves. So welcome to both of you. We're looking forward to an exciting discussion today. I think just as an opening question, for both of you, you're really working at the interface between healthcare and AI. And so from your different perspectives, could you give an insight to our community of participants, some of the challenges you've had to face, or some of the creative solutions you've had to create as you try to bring both worlds together to help effectively solve the problems you're focusing on?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. So in our world, we're very focused on nutrition, and we see that as a critical missing piece in the whole healthcare puzzle. We all know how important it is, how much of a driver it is for chronic disease. There's a whole world of professionals and scientists that have developed great information about how nutrition affects the body, but for whatever reason, it hasn't been embedded into mainstream medicine, at least in the West. And so our main charter is to elevate that nutritional science and the data that comes with it into that framework of medicine. So we focus on looking at actual nutritional intake of people. We measure up to 132 nutrients. We compare those against science-based guidelines, and then we ultimately corroborate whether those nutritional protocols are working by looking at the more traditional medical biomarkers. So I'd say the biggest challenge, probably for most data scientists, is having good, reliable data that's clean and accurate, and that can be used for machine learning or other methodologies in order to build that AI infrastructure.
And for myself, so with our company Valhalla Healthcare, we have a product that's called Allevia, and that's an intelligent patient intake tool that automates clinical notes, and it's built with prediction models. Essentially, the big problem in medicine that we're trying to solve is the amount of time that doctors spend on the computer, on the electronic health record, instead of with patients. And that rising administrative burden is because of this growing, use of the electronic health record. So we're trying to essentially speed up a lot of that and documentation process, so the doctor can spend more time doctoring and less time documenting. So how we go about that approach, just to introduce you as to our application of AI machine learning, is that we have developed prediction models. It's very similar as, like some of the clinical decision support tools, but instead of providing those probabilities, we actually don't provide the probabilities. We actually use that as a metric to identify what might be the most relevant clinical data out of the thousands and thousands of potential clinical data elements that we can extract, everything from symptom to medical history to risk factors to response to treatments to a diagnostic result, and get that information so we can extract it and compile that into a clinical document that the doctor can have about you way in advance, so they don't have to start that from scratch. Now, for some of the key challenges for data scientists in the field that we're working in is of course, it's always going to be data. How do we get our hands on clinical data, high quality clinical data? Because as we know, a lot of the data that's in the electronic health record is actually quite low quality, to tell you the truth. There's a lot of processed data, observational data, subjective data. Those are we make it an actual concerted effort to avoid those specific data unless there's some high sensitivity, high specificity data like diagnostics, lab results, right, imaging. But I think the more key challenge for data scientists within working with healthcare is getting the understanding of the clinical value of that data, or the clinical value of the implementation practicality of the models that you're developing, and what is the key value that you're trying to achieve, but from a clinical perspective. And in our case, clinical workflow. It's very delicate, it's very specific, it's hard to understand because it takes years and years of training and background and patience. And I'm a really big key proponent of allying physicians, other healthcare providers together work hand in hand on product teams with the data scientists to be able to kind of meet those two different worlds and intersect them together so they can both translate and speak the same language so they can have a concerted effort in developing real value in healthcare.
Oh, that's great. That is so different, but a big domain that you guys are working on. And especially, I mean, we are doing similar things as Magnimind. What we see, data scientists have a hard time to understand the data first, what it means. We do a lot of imaging, and we have a hard time to understand, and we have a hard time to understand the clinical meaning of it. And there are a lot of clinicians we are also talking to. We see that they have a data, but they don't know they can get a lot out of it. So there are a lot of existing data that's not been utilized well. So that's pretty similar experience we are all facing. So for Alan's idea, I had the idea of working on nutrition and AI for like 7 years ago, which I couldn't raise a funding. You got lucky. So I believe you can do a lot with the nutritional AI, and also I was interested in nutritional genomics, which I find that there's 3-4 companies there. And when I worked in one of the top companies as an intern, I understood the value of nutritional genomics. It's gonna grow, I guess, faster. So one thing that I have question for startup, you guys, how do you find the investment space, and how do you interact with your investors and do they understand the value of what you're doing, or do you have a difficulty in that?
Well, it's never easy to find the right investors. And I think one of the challenges, at least in the nutritional space and the AI space, is despite everybody realizing the need for it, it's not necessarily well understood. And so the ability for us to demonstrate benefit through our programs is, the most effective way that we can provide value and demonstrate investability, so to speak. But I'd be lying if I said it was easy, because it's definitely not. And you need to find the right investors with the right intentions also. And so for us, it's of course about generating revenue and building the business, but it's also about promoting the science and creating new science, actually. As I mentioned, there's a lot of great nutritional science, medical science that's got this giant rift between them. The nutritionists and dietitians typically don't talk to the medical doctors. And so you've got two very important industries that are both looking at the problem of health with one eye closed, so to speak. The doctors aren't looking at nutrition, and the nutritionists aren't looking at the biomarker data. So as we're going through our investment process, we're finding those individuals and institutions that value that more systems-based approach that we're using, and see the larger need to apply a different set of tools, AI and complex system theory, to this really old problem that's really central to improving people's health. So we're actually going through fundraising now as well. So I would encourage anyone to reach out to me if you're interested, and love to have a discussion about how we'll be providing value to you.
Just to mention that we have, I've come across several investors also watching us. Hopefully they find it interesting.
Excellent. Look forward to speaking with them.
Yeah, I'm going to second a lot of what Alan said. We're actually also in the middle of our own raise, an institutional seed raise. So we are actively getting a lot of these questions from the investors. And like I said, I'm going to second what Alan's saying, because it's really going to come down to what is the value. Like, don't talk to me about so much the application of it, the modeling, how you're going about it, which models you're using, how are you improving them, right? What real world value are you achieving? And so that's more of a focus on the company, the solution, the problem, rather than the technology or that's itself. It's a pretty big, one of the big things that we internally like to focus on. We do over half of our team are physicians, even our full stack developers and product engineers are physicians, some of them still practicing today. And that's the one thing, it's like, look, first you craft and understand the problem and solutions through the provider lens. Only then and afterwards should you then look at the technical approach and work with the technical teams. It's extremely important to be able to demonstrate that. With that said, investors do want to know about it's going to vary and depend on which stage you're in. And in our case, we're institutional seed, early stage. They're going to really want to know, and one of the big things that actually have come across for us, and luckily we're doing, is investors are interested, even honestly, regardless if you're an AI machine learning company or not, what are you doing to extract and provide value from the health data that you're collecting today? How can that be synergized with population health platforms, data analytics? How can that be used for risk mitigation? So early stage companies, honestly, from day one, you should really start be thinking about what is your plan for healthcare data analytics, even if you may not be able to execute quote unquote early, because again, it's all about the volume of data and of course the indexing and how you're going to be utilizing your data and your unique approach. Got it, for later your Series A when you actually execute, but really start thinking about that strategy now, because the investors, if they're going to be on for the long haul, they're going to want to know how are you going to bring additional value to your company, to your value offering in the future. So that'll align with their incentives for having you get a better valuation and them getting a better return.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I tell you something, we are also, I'm a co-founder of another company called SmartLens. We've been working building contact lens for eye pressure measurement. It's unique. There is nothing there in the market. But the problem is, are you going to convert that to money? So are people going to use it? That's really hard and chicken egg issue. I said, give me the money and I will show you it will. Say, no, just show that it will create the money. So I will give you the funding. I think it's a very similar problem in AI. It may be hard to just show that it's going to bring value unless you just go to market with a good investment. So the one thing that I have, I'm really curious, how do you see your technology or platform is protected in terms of IP? How do you see competitive in the market? So value you generate is not gonna be the bothered by another company coming up.
In our case, it's a number of ways. It's first and foremost through making use of the data in a meaningful way. So as we build larger data sets that are able to understand that relationship between those input nutrient levels and those output biomarker levels in a more sophisticated manner with greater predictive ability, it becomes harder to reproduce. So you could build all the same technology, use the same methodologies, but without that data itself and building the algorithms or other methodologies to provide that value, it's basically an empty shell, so to speak. So again, getting back to that main point of providing value, which really means improving the health as demonstrably measured by the traditional biomarkers, and doing so in a more cost-effective way, whether it's algorithmically or through machine learning or other AI techniques. It's that value of the data in terms of its ability to perform that predictive analytic capability and validate that ultimately we believe will provide the most protectability for the company longer term.
My opinion is that nothing is irreproducible, right? You can reproduce anything. So especially when it comes to software, and which is why I'm not a huge fan of like the patenting your IP and things, because that's a separate conversation. But with that note, that everything can be essentially almost copied. It's really going to depend on a couple of things. So you as a company, when if you have something that's a little bit more novel, in our case, we do have a saturated, there are a lot of fragmented players in our space, and a question we do get from investors for, your differentiation. And so our thing is making sure that our key value proposition is strong, which it is, because physicians are usually the stakeholders that bring it up to the main decision makers and get us essentially those partnerships as a result. So it is going to be to understanding that very key problem and understanding it very well and solving that problem and translating to that value. Now, with that said, as long as you're continuing and hitting your milestones, generating revenue, expanding, and have that plan to essentially grow past that initial products, that diversification will be able to, I think, help kind of really give you that strength that you need to continue moving forward in the case, which you can guarantee once there is this quote unquote value seen, especially when a monetary value from what you're providing, there will be other companies that will be able to follow, big ones that will want to try to, build something to replace, that does what you do. But hopefully by that time, when they have something, because you're so ahead and far in the game, including with the data collection, that by that time that they catch up, you've already left them in the dirt with, a bunch of other offerings, buildings, customer acquisition. So they'll probably have to make that decision to either try to compete with you, sink a lot of money, or actually just acquire you, buy you out.
There's some questions.
An exit strategy.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Sorry. There are a couple of questions coming from the community, which I think touch on what you both mentioned, Alan and Alex, regarding some of the pre-existing biases that you have to contend with, and some of the mindset shifts that you have to kind of envision and get investors to envision, and your whole companies to transform. So the questions that relate to Alan's work: how do you get providers to give you the data from patients? Don't you need tens of thousands of patients for this nutritional information? And also, they're mentioning that good nutrition is part of improving aging. Improving aging is the golden ticket to delaying disease. Improving aging should be a big focus for AI, nutrition being one component of that. And then in regards to Alex's work, they're saying that it's really hard for a physician to look at improving a patient's care in a fee-for-service environment. Physicians are interested in making money, and getting a patient well in practice is not part of that equation. I believe a value-based care must exist completely in the healthcare practices, so that these practices will be knocking at the research institutions or startup companies' doors. Why is that? Because a well patient means higher profits in a value-based care environment. So those are specific questions for both of you. And then there's another overriding question about, isn't there a whole new set of questions here that are related to defeating COVID-19? That's always the elephant in the room here. So if you could maybe talk about the specific questions for your domains that you work in, then also maybe how what you're doing could potentially help with COVID-19.
Sure. So are you able to hear me? I lost my connection for some reason.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So with respect to the data question, it really depends on how you're using the data. The person who asked the question is correct in terms of using that large quantity of data for neural network training, for example, or other methodologies along the AI space. There's other ways that one can utilize data just algorithmically, and comparing that data flow against sort of the standard bread and butter nutritional science. So by comparing input nutrients against that science, we can see what the risk points are according to that science itself, which then could be corroborated again against those output biomarkers, and then make adjustments based on any deviations from ideal biomarker values. Now, over time, as we acquire more data, we can apply more sophisticated methodologies, deep learning systems, other neural network-based and machine learning-based methodologies, but there's still a lot of value that can be acquired and utilized even prior to that point. Separately, with respect to COVID itself, we actually have made a significant shift in focus starting back in March towards COVID itself. And we know from a lot of the information that's coming out of the preliminary studies and even anecdotal evidence how important a person's immune system is to protecting one against COVID. And so we also know that nutrition plays a very important role with respect to your immune system. And there's new studies that are going on right now, as well as other papers that have been published, for example, that are looking at the relationship between vitamin D levels and COVID-19 symptoms. And what they found with numerous epidemiological studies is that those people with lower levels of vitamin D have much more severe symptoms and higher mortality rates than those with higher levels of vitamin D. It also may, to some extent, explain why certain minority populations are also having more severe symptoms and repercussions from COVID-19, who themselves traditionally also have far lower levels of vitamin D and poor nutrition compared to other sectors of the population. So that's something that we're very focused on right now. We think that's a very important thing that people can do in a practical day-to-day level. You know, eating better, taking some very basic blood tests of things for measuring nutrient levels in your blood, for example, in order to optimize your own immune system and to give yourselves the best protection against any more severe symptoms if you do get infected with COVID-19.
All right. And for some of the questions that were addressed to me, the first one being in regards to the payment models. Yeah, this is, it's an important part of the conversation. I almost feel like in itself can be its own conversation. And it is being played out in the landscape right now. We have fee for service on one side and the value-based care on another side. And it's really a clash of the titans to determine who's going to prevail for the future. And, obviously as physicians, our incentives are being, making sure we take care of the patient, right, in the best way possible. Obviously we have to be compensated, but, that's the main priority. And I think just about most physicians can agree and understand that. The incentives, with some of these new payment models do, potentially align, with these capitated models, the upside and downside risk structures, where if you're able to keep your patients healthy by, decreasing the utilization of, say, the emergency room and inpatient stays and be able to prevent those conditions, any of those savings you get to keep. That type of incentive model in a value-based care, just to simplify, obviously incentivizes, physicians and care providers to make sure that the patients stay healthy. And that's great. And that's actually something, one of the newer partnerships we're working with in value-based care is working with population health analytics and nephrology groups, where with our workflow and intake, we're able to screen actually patients, regularly for, risk factors associated with CKD, stage 4 and stage 5, chronic kidney disease, by the way, which includes, of course, some of the symptoms of, volume, water retention, some symptoms of uremia or too much nitrogen in the body, being able to screen for those to then further work up, okay, let's see what kind of issues here. Maybe the patient doesn't have a means of transportation, which brings in those social determinants of health. That could be, flagging, the case manager, this patient could really benefit from either home dialysis or a transportation program that can get them to the dialysis center, so they don't end up going to the emergency room to, for their dialysis, which is obviously more expensive, more risks for getting nosocomial or hospital acquired infections. So we're really excited about that, because those data elements that we're able to bring from the patient side, which we've with the data science portions of how our models have been trained to actually index each of those data points and quantitate them from in aggregate, but then also in individual spaced over time. Those are some of the big main things that we're really excited to provide and contribute to help keep patients healthy, keep them outside of the hospital so they can manage their care more effectively and at a lower cost in the outpatient setting. In regards to COVID-19, so this is some work that we have rolled out with, for especially in telehealth, some of our recent partnerships. Very early on in about April, we did get together with a telehealth platform to provide our intelligent intake platform with the early data coming out of Wuhan and Italy, screening for and feeding essentially that early data into our model to give it a sense of, here are the high important symptoms, fever, cough, the risk factors that we see, like BMI, chronic conditions, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, which seem to be correlated with, higher likelihood of death when provided in the inpatient setting. And, other kind of maybe what we call red flag symptoms, like what we call cyanosis or bluing of the limbs, face, or lips due to low oxygen, hemoptysis, which is coughing up blood, those types of key symptoms, in addition to help kind of maybe triage some of those patients to be seen by a physician earlier, because they may need to have more rapid treatment. So, and with the more data is coming out, and especially with the PCR data, being of higher accuracy, that we can actually start to use and kind of improve some of those models that we developed. Now we have more data that we can try to tie to those initial symptoms. So then we can have a more accurate model moving forward as we transition to this period of time where we get closer to the vaccine. We're still going to have COVID-19 with us for, months on end, if not longer than that. So that's something of very big importance that we're potentially looking at working with, maybe even the federal government on some grants to see if we can help with differentiation between flu versus COVID-19 versus non-influenza colds, different types of coronaviruses, based on the symptomology patterns and the data that we're collecting directly from the patient.
And yeah, I have a question from our audience. They ask, how did you validate your idea from being an actual idea to an actual solution to a particular problem? And I'm gonna add to that also. And a lot of these companies, when they start to do some of their pitches, especially now during the COVID era, they seem to really weigh it heavily on the COVID, even if it might not be in their core domain expertise area. So maybe you can also comment on how much you think companies should consider putting that as part of their pitch versus not, depending on what you're seeing. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would suggest that that's a great question, because validation is really critical right now, especially with COVID, because there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much conjecture out there. There's actually very little that's known about the disease. We're learning more every day. And as we develop new information that gets corroborated, it's important that that gets disseminated. And the validation part of that is really what, in my opinion, will elevate it beyond the noise, so to speak. So part of what we're doing to perform that validation is, again, starting with the basic science of nutrition as we know how it affects immunity, for example, getting back to the COVID-19, as well as any of the cutting edge information that's coming out. And to Alex's point, we're also incorporating intake questionnaires that are looking at comorbidities, other factors that might be associated with, again, more severe symptoms of COVID or types of immunity issues. And then we're putting that information in the hands of the practitioners to augment other sources of information they have, like patient histories or other testing they might do beyond what we would do and acquire through an online assessment. And then ultimately the proof of efficacy, we believe is still validated through those actual biomarker test cases, as well as even survey information and more quantitative information about symptom severity and hospitalization rates and mortality rates. So we're very much leaning on the latest science about COVID-19 and what's coming out from many of these clinical trials to help corroborate that and implement that as sort of preliminary protocols that people can use in order to improve those outcomes. But it will take time, especially with COVID-19, to do more detailed clinical trials that are looking at these multifactorial contributions to a person's health. And that, traditionally has not been widely embraced by the clinical trial community because there's so many factors that go into it. So we're looking and actually exploring right now, both by participating in some of these clinical trials, but also considering less traditional forms of clinical trials, like citizen science experiments, for example, where we bring in larger groups of people to implement different protocols that, again, are multifactorial, and we look at outcomes. And the difference with those types of studies is we may not be able to identify, one or two contributory factors, but we can look at the grand protocol itself and say, okay, if you do all of these 5 or 10 things, your outcomes in general are going to be better than if you don't do these things. So this is in many ways kind of an emerging area of research, in my opinion, that will need to be embraced in a larger manner within the scientific community. And it is actually being done that way now.
Yeah, this is actually a really important question that all entrepreneurs should definitely keep in mind if they're thinking about, a solution to a problem. And that is that you spend a significant amount of time and energy into validation of the idea that you potentially have roughly sketched in your head, but more importantly, validation of the problem and validation of the limitations of the current solutions, how you're specifically different. So for me, I believe like as early as I started my 3rd year of medical school, where I really started on my first rotation in OB-GYN is where I noticed the problem and started thinking about it. And then as I rotated into different specialties throughout my 3rd year medical school, albeit I was still a medical student, in studying for all my boards and everything, I still had in the back of my mind, and I would do these essentially customer validation type of interviews with my attendings. I know it's like gasp, picking the brains of my attendings about the non-clinicals really. So I did that and made observations, obviously being part of this quote unquote problem, having the basic building blocks from the clinical years and the 1st and 2nd year of the academic years. So, I'd say you need to at least give it a solid 6 to 12 months of investigation and analysis, digging into the research and the literature with what I did, those customer kind of testimonials, competitive analysis, what's out there, what are some of the current use cases, which actually will go and transition to another question I saw in the Q&A. What are the current ways that this problem is being solved? What are the limitations with those problems are being solved? What are the technical solutions that have been developed to try to solve that problem? What are their limitations for solving the problem? And there in that you should find that gap. And if your solution fits in that gap, then you're probably onto something, and then is when you should start considering to invest resources, because it's expensive. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time and energy and money to build out a solution. So you want to make sure you are 100% right as much as possible. And then, essentially my thing that I tell future entrepreneurs is you try to kill your idea if you can. Like, if legitimately try to kill your idea. And if it doesn't die with a significant effort, then you're probably onto something.
Yeah.
Picking up on that idea. Oh, sorry. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. So picking up on that idea, Alex, and I think this applies to both Alan and Alex. You could have the most incisive elaboration of the problem and the best solution for the problem, but of course you work in an environment around you that may influence how much traction your solution has. So in the realm of Alan's work, you have this mindset among patients that an FDA approved drug is the way to go, not understanding that the daily nutrition feeds how their health is, for the plays a much bigger role to play in their health. That is also not taught in medical schools. I can only count maybe like 1 hour that we ever had on nutrition, in regards to how that applies to medicine. So, these are these really high level entrenched biases and forces that you're coming up against with your solution. And I just wonder how you navigate that. How do you motivate some of these potential entrenched challenges and the organizations that help continue those mindsets and make them allies to you so that you can move forward with your plan. Similarly to Alex, we're taught in medical school that, from being a medical student, you're the investigator, you're the information finder. It's your job to do the history of the present illness and to compile all the information, the patient's past medical history, and by doing so, you're going to then lead to differential diagnosis that's going to inform the test that you're going to order for the patient. Now you're coming in with a solution that, for all practical purposes, as a practicing physician, it does make sense. Why do we have to go through all this when an AI algorithm can just kind of sift through all the years and hundreds of documents and put that together for us as a starting point? So I guess the question is, how do you change mindsets while you're pursuing the ideal solutions that you've both identified for your respective problems, and change the environment to make that solution have more traction?
Well, I think, to a large extent, we can thank COVID-19 for, allowing us to reshuffle the deck, so to speak. It's revealed a lot of things in a wider basis in the population that many people on the inside knew about for a long time. And among those, for example, is what happens when you leave the doctor's office. If it's something, with a chronic disease, we all know that nutrition plays a very important role. But there traditionally has not been an infrastructure within the medical world that can extend that information to the patient, especially when they leave the office. So part of what's come out of COVID is a lack of connection between existing patients and their practitioners. I've heard this almost daily from many well-established physicians that are not communicating with their patients or seeing their patients in the way they were before. And so suddenly they've had massive disruptions to their income. They're worried about the long-term efficacy of their practice. Medical institutions themselves have had to forego a lot of revenue from the more traditional medical services and are not getting reimbursed at the same level through any kind of COVID-focused interventions. And so it's forced the industry to kind of re-examine how they do things. And so that's created, I think, a great opportunity to help fill that void and to rethink how we do things. And so one of the ways that we're trying to address this ourselves is through ancillary health practitioners like dietitians and even health coaches that can work in concert with physicians and extend that information to those patients, either in self-guided educational programs or group coaching programs or one-on-one consultations with coaches and dietitians, in order to really extend that information and to further address two other parts of the problem that often aren't considered in the pure medical world. One is the psychological drivers for people, whether they change behavior or not. And it's not an easy thing for people to change their behavior. And then the other one is the social determinants. So who are the people in a patient's main circles who they emulate and who drive their own behavior? And so by kind of making some of these modifications to how the practice of medicine is performed after a person leaves the office through these ancillary services, we can address simultaneously the nutritional component, the behavioral component, even the social component, and make the medicine itself more effective as a result. And so again, at the end of the day, it's going to be about, proving efficacy and proving value and even, reestablishing that patient-doctor relationship, albeit through a different methodology possibly, but still, fostering that care between those primary individuals.
Yeah, the resistance of change is very real. It's going to be one of the biggest problems you'll ever face, I think, as an entrepreneur for any industry. But that's even multiplied even further with healthcare. Healthcare is notoriously known to be a glacial, moving industry for various reasons. They say that it takes sometimes, from for an inception to actually application of an invention, it takes like 10 years in healthcare. I've heard, and that sounds about right, to be honest. So that said, ways to try to break that wall of resistance, I think there are a couple of things here at play. At least for the first point, which has been attributable to our success, is that we speak to those that are the ones that are gradually having more clout in organizational discussions, and those are the physicians. They understand the value of what we're providing. They know that we solve it, and they are what we call the clinical champions that take this up and carry that baton up to through that internal bureaucracy, just cut right through it, get to the decision makers, and from there, our value is known, being seconded by those key stakeholders. And so the second is that that kind of goes hand in hand with that is it's either innovate or die. With these new changes and models and additional stressors when it comes to the bottom lines and finances to these health systems due to various reasons, whether it be rising costs or now the unpredictability with, say, COVID-19 cutting a huge chunk of their revenue, there being the hospital system, the health system, which mostly came from ambulatory surgical centers or surgeries and procedures. They're forced to rethink and innovate, or just starve and die. So that it's a little bit more of a cynical view rather than being proactive and adopting. But the future is unknown, as we can see with COVID-19, and obviously we're ill prepared from the health system administrative levels and their finance models to be able to adapt and understand these issues, these changes. So I think there is a key element which Alan was discussing, that there sometimes change will happen to you if you don't change to adapt to the future. But I prefer to go with the former and work with those forward thinking organizations that really do take seriously the key stakeholders, in this case the physicians, take their opinions very highly, actually make them part of the decision-making process for procurement, which is the case with the health systems that we're working with. And so, we are thankful about that, because that aligns the missions of our customers and our company together.
Yeah, these are really great, insightful conversations. I like to make a few comments about what we talk. So I like the idea of validation of problem is really very important, maybe more important trying to solve some problem you don't know there's a problem. And especially data science is really the key, and your platform is good because you have a lot of data. You will see if there is a problem with the data. I think that's what data scientists can do, and I see myself that data science is really the strongest in there we can do. And another thing about COVID, especially your platforms has everything in there that what you may understand about COVID problems, so how it is related to it, maybe nutrition, maybe the historical disease map, and maybe other things your data, your platform may provide. Especially I'm really keen of nutritional aspect as well, that there's a nutritional intake is important, and there's also the problem nutritional deficiency, that although you intake it, but your body is not absorbing that nutrition. And I find that from some genomical factors as well, that it's causing deficiencies. Although you take it, it doesn't absorb. So all this information may help also COVID, and fast forward for maybe next epidemics, pandemics, it may help us. So that I see the big value, and I see a lot of some questions may come from investors that I feel the tone, because I've experienced so many questions are like that, which is good. So I have one question in terms of, like, we have a audience from both data science and AI. Data science and healthcare. So how do you see, what is your experience how do you recommend people to work together? So you recommend data scientists to go learn about, the healthcare, which I learned a lot from Chirag about actually healthcare, especially. I'm becoming an oncologist through the Zoom in next 2 years.
It's the
So do you recommend that, or you recommend the?
That's the non-accredited school of neuro-oncology,
Yes.
but you know, Murat knows enough, you know, to do our collaborative work. So I think it's a great exchange we're able to have, definitely.
But I won't see any patient. I mean, as it's good for startup point of view. So and or you recommend the MDs to learn data science. What is your opinion on that issue?
Well, I think, it's a big problem. So if we really think about it in broad terms, I see there being essentially three interconnected systems within the body, so to speak, that really drive that relationship between your input nutrients and other factors and your output biomarkers. And the three elements are the more traditional metabolic elements. So what's all your biochemistry doing in your body? The second one you already touched on is the genetics, and more specifically the epigenetics. So which genes get turned on or off based on your nutrition or its interaction with the metabolics. And the third is your gut microbiome. And that's also, extremely important. Probably half of your immune system comes through your gut. There's a deep interaction with your gut and your brain, your metabolic systems, and your genetics. So these are deep, difficult, high data problems. And so no one company is going to, in my opinion, be able to get all of that data themselves. So an important lesson, I think, for the community is this notion of sharing data and having data banks where de-identified data that includes all of these components can be consolidated and made available to data scientists in order to ultimately evaluate what's the right set of foods or nutrients for me individually compared to my twin who might eat exactly the same thing but have a very different set of responses as a result. And so that's where I'm hoping the industry is going. I see a lot of movement in there right now. Certainly the larger health systems have access to more of that data than many others, but typically they're still missing pieces of it, like the nutritional data. So as we learn more about the need for a view of the body as a complex system and applying network theory and AI to these big data problems, I believe that the industry will embrace that notion of sharing that data and make it available for the data scientists to do what they do best.
Yeah, I have a pretty simple answer to this. What I like to say is that physicians are from Mars and data scientists are from Venus, right? They come from two completely different worlds. But here's the key thing that's in common between them. One, these two groups of individuals are extremely intelligent people, right? There's no doubt about that. And two, these two groups of people have just this insatiable drive to learn. And I think based on those two key parallels between these two audiences, that's where you start. You get the physicians, you get the data scientists in a room, and they come together, and you really just essentially do a hackathon in some ways of the problems. What are you passionate about? What are you passionate about? And then now you start addressing, well, what is this? What does this mean? What is a hemoglobin? What is this? Well, here, and then the physician teaches them, basically runs through them. Here's hemoglobin reference ranges, right? If it's, over this, and then now, of course, the data scientist is thinking about their data scientists and statistics and distributions that obviously they're going to know more than the physician about this case and the physics and all that. But being able to translate to the data scientist, what are the practical implications of these clinical questions or problems, that really starts to get gears turning into the data scientist's head. And then vice versa, the data scientists can help the physician understand some of these key issues, like the limitations of quote unquote reference ranges that we have for humans, and knowing that every single human is different and everyone has probably technically from a data science theory a different reference range. So they can too teach something to the physicians, and they can come together and synergize and synthesize, together as a greater through the summation of their knowledge than from individually. I think that's my simplest answer for that.
So I think Magnimind, through Murat, you have your charge now. We need to create like a Tinder for data scientists and clinicians and healthcare to come together and share their needs and their knowledge, and let's move forward.
I already have a hashtag. It's hashtag talk data to me.
There we go.
That's great. I mean, we have a plan to do data tom with the universities. So everyone is welcome to just send us an email. We are planning that. I think it's gonna bring some new value. So you guys can ask questions from Q&A, and we have a lot of questions there. So there is go ahead, share. Yeah.
Let's see here. It says, let's look at this one here. Thanks for your responses for previous response. It was really insightful. Question to the panel: as we are seeing in these times, mental health or wellness is taking a toll. Are there any studies going on in this area? If you can give some insights into this domain. So I think, Alan, you touched upon this in terms of some of the psychological determinants of health, not to mention the metabolomics and the behavioral sciences as well. But how do we deal with this behavioral change, the stresses that are on patients, on providers, on everyone really during COVID-19?
So I kind of look at that problem like I look at every problem. There's multiple levels. There's the biological level that contributes to your neurotransmitter production, and imbalances can cause mental illness and behavioral changes. There's of course the psychological problem of what's the trigger for you to respond in a certain way, and what's the reward that enforces that behavior, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. And of course there's the social element. Who are you connected to? Who's in your community? And so that's why it really needs to be a team approach, and that's why AI, I think, can play a huge role in this, because you really have to address all of those problems simultaneously to really address the whole person. And so I go back to this idea of, let's start with the fundamentals. Let's make sure that your core nutrition incorporates everything your body needs to build all of the metabolic and other needs within the body to provide your brain the right set of neurotransmitters and the right ability to address some of these biological issues that may have come up. But then let's also, examine the triggers for our habits, and how can we examine those and address them and come up with better behaviors in response to those triggers that have a better reward that will reinforce them. And the same goes with the social elements. And that's why I think it's valuable to think about community and the idea of groups and group coaching as an adjunct way to help connect people together with good information and provide that peer-to-peer support and learning that you get in that environment that goes beyond the biology and the pure individual psychology as well.
Okay, these are great. So we actually came to end of the hour, and I shared the link for our YouTube channel. People are asking if there are recordings of it. You can subscribe there, and there's recordings. We're actually editing this one and then reposting it, just let you know. And you can watch this and previous and future ones from there. I thank Alex, Alan, Chirag, and Ryan for that insightful conversation. For each one, we learned something new. And if you guys have any questions to any of us, you can reach out through LinkedIn or through us. We are happy to connect. So thank you everyone for participating. It was a great, fruitful conversation.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you all.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And for any outstanding questions, you're welcome. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn or email.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for hosting. This was a great talk. I really enjoyed participating.
Great. Thanks. All right, take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye. Bye.